All right, we're coming in hot. Mark, unless you've been living under a rock, which I assume most of you are, you know that the United States has conducted an attack on Venezuela, has absconded the country, has kidnapped, has captured, detained, whatever word you want to use, not only Nicolas Maduro, but his wife. I mean, just going cold-blooded here. President Trump also came out and said that the United States would basically be running affairs in the country for some amount of time until there can be a peaceful and whatever transition, and also that U.S. assets would be managing Venezuelan oil and that it would be very good. We'll talk about all that, and I'll probably quote that a little bit later in. But Marko, I want to start for a second because there's so many takes. Like, and I'm sure you have takes and I have takes, but I want to take a second and start off here with this. And people might think that I'm going to start off by criticizing the Trump administration, or that I'm going to take a victory lap for predicting this in our forecast episode. I'm not going to start in those places. I think maybe listeners have gotten used to me being the voice of the liberal elite on this podcast. In our frame of reference, that's usually the position, the counter position that I'm taking to you. And I want all of the liberal elite that is listening to this to lean in really, really closely, turn on the TikTok camera, get really, really close into your headphones here. Would you all please go frack yourselves? My God, the clutching of pearls that I have seen on this, the New York Times editorial board. Oh my God, a president has been broken. This is terrible. President Trump is destroying the rule of law. President Trump, golf clap. I salute you for embracing what has always been U.S. foreign policy. In this particular instance, your vulgarity is absolutely perfect. George H.W. Bush, top of Marko's pyramid for foreign policy leaders, did this to Noriega in Panama in 89-90. What did we do to Allende in Chile? What have we run around doing in Latin America and South America for literally the past 200 years? Just because previous administrations wanted to dress it up in the context of the Cold War, or the fight against poverty, or the fight against all these other things. Like, it was John Foster Dulles in the Eisenhower administration who took down a democratically elected government in Iran, who started this whole thing with the CIA running around places. Think about DRC and Patrice Lumumba. Think about the U.S. record in Vietnam. This is how U.S. foreign policy has always worked, and I want to salute President Trump for being the first U.S. president to not dress up this type of behavior as if it's some kind of noble city on a hill. We are bringing freedom and democracy to the people. He's just like, nah, this is how it works, and we're going to do it the way we've always done it, and we're not going to pretend that it's anything other than that. Now, President Trump, if you're listening, I do have a little bit of a bone to pick because you just pardoned this Honduran narco trafficker and you're going after this guy on the grounds of narco trafficking. Like, that hypocrisy does not sit well with me. I really have a difficult time with hypocrisy. But that's where I want to start off. All of you liberal elite, all of you people who think the United States is exceptional and has been exceptional, this is literally how U.S. foreign policy has worked in this part of the world since the beginning of the Republic. There's nothing unprecedented here. There is nothing strange here. There's a lot of other things to unpack. I have a lot of takes here, but I wanted to start there. Marko, where do you want to start?
I want to start with the fact that I got texted like 17 times by people telling me we need an emergency pod. I'm just gonna say, the world, the universe of Geopolitical Cousins listeners is very lucky. It's raining in Los Angeles today, so I can't go and play my usual Saturday morning basketball game. Um, but yeah, I think you're absolutely correct. There was I watched the press conference today on President Trump, Marco Rubio, um, you know, Hackset, and yeah, there was no couching of this in any normative moralistic things. And I think on one hand that's good because it is less hypocritical. It's like, look, this is what we did. We offered this guy a chance. He didn't take it. I'll get back to that, by the way, at the later
Yeah, yeah.
when we bring in some conspiracy theory. But I think that I do think it's important. I think it's also important to note that your reference to 1989 invasion of Panama is important. General Manuel Noriega was indicted on, I think, racketeering, drug smuggling, a few other things. And so, where George H.W. Bush authorized the invasion of Panama, which lasted 2 months and cost 23 American service members their lives, that they captured him, they arrested him, they sent him back to the United States. Very similar to this, except for one thing, which is my first hot take on this. which I'm sorry that I have to descend into the Tom Clancy world, rather than some profound geopolitical, like, what does this mean for the future of the world? I just want to like point out that Chuck Norris in Delta Force is real. And we made a huge omission, first of all, in our geopolitical movies pod that I did not bring Delta Force. Delta Force was hugely
Sure.
influential on me. It was like a 10-year-old watching some like movies of Chuck Norris just like running around with questionable actors playing like the bad guys. I think the Arabs in the movies Delta Force were all played by Israeli actors. Maybe also some Mexicans, you know? I mean, this is like the 80s. You know, America didn't really like Hollywood didn't have like wherewithal. The point is
No, this was like the heart of Harvey Weinstein in Hollywood. Like this is the type of environment it was,
that's yeah, that's the environment that but like I just want to like Grenada. We talked about Grenada on one of our podcasts, right? Like America trying to get rid of its demons by beating the crap out of some island nation that turned Marxist. Panama. Like people died invading Panama. American service members died invading Panama. I don't know if you've been to Panama. I've been to Panama. I think you can invade Panama with bicycles. You know, I mean, it's like a city state, for God's sakes. This is Venezuela. It's got Sukhoi jets. And the United States of America just flew in into the presidential palace, pulled Maduro in his PJs and his wife, and flew them to the Iwo Jima, I think, helicopter carrier.
Yeah, well, there's
What?
actually two really important points that you said in there. First of all, I'm sure you saw the picture that President Trump posted of Maduro like detained. Also wild. Like it goes back to the vulgarity thing. Like, President Trump, they didn't want to make Osama bin Laden a martyr. They just dumped him off of a boat and, created a whole host of conspiracy theories about did they get him? What did they get him? No, like President Trump wants you to see that he has this guy in cuffs, that he's under arrest. Like it's a level of it's brutality. Like, can you imagine that coming out of the United States? So there's that. But I think you actually hit on a really important point, which is we just flew helicopters in there and we didn't take a single shot, which tells me that, and this is really how it was going to work. The Venezuelan mail, I have nothing here but inference to go this. So if the aggregators want to take it, great. But I'm just inferring here. I have no evidence. But it seems to me like the Venezuelan military gave the guy up, that they understood that he was a liability, that they somehow got word out that they
Wait,
weren't. Oh,
wait,
what's he got?
wait, what is this? Uh-oh. Uh-oh. I did not expect to do this early in the pod.
Uh-oh, here we go. Here
Here
we
we
go.
go. All right. Here is Conspiracy Marko.
Take it away, Conspiracy Marko.
So for those of you who are not listening to this on a video, I have a ridiculous ski helmet on top of my head. There you go. This is now the signal that the Conspiracy Marko has arrived. Jacob will have his own attire for Conspiracy Jacob. And I just want to salute, hat tip, this is why we're cousins. We both went to the same exact point. Like, the US military is awesome. It is the greatest military on the planet. All respect to it. But hold the fucking minute, man. Even in Delta Force, somebody dies. You know what I mean? Even in a movie, like, Chuck Norris has to show his human side. He's got to show, like, he's got to clutch the body of his dying comrade. You know what I mean? And yet, in this operation, somehow the United States of America, Venezuela is a large country with a sophisticated military that flies Sukhois and just landed on the on the grassy knoll of the presidential palace, shot our way into the palace. Watch me now using our way, because like, what's up? Front running. Let's go. USA, USA. The point is, the Conspiracy Marko is 100% aligned with Conspiracy Jacob. I think, as my Serbian father would tell me, something happens in geopolitics. This is one of the first lessons of geopolitics. Predrag, my dad, would look at me and say, Marko, he would take a drag of a cigarette. It's all Hollywood. Baby, I think this is Hollywood. I think there was no fighting. Like zero fight. And if there was some fighting, it was all for Hollywood. The rocket attacks, like the US called, there was an agreement, like, you guys bombed these 3 sites. Cool shit. Let's get some like bombs flying off. How do you do this and nobody dies? unless this is why President Trump is so gallantly saying we're going to run Venezuela, because he already has the people who are going to run it. And no, it's not going to be like American boots on the ground. There's 0% chance there's American boots on the ground in an Iraqi capacity. Maybe there's like some contractors defending some, like, I don't know, Baron Trump is going to become like, an oil executive. I don't know. But the point is, this is so neat. This is so perfect. This is so extraordinary that first and foremost, if there is no conspiracy, if the American military really did this the way Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, said, then fuck, this is the absolutely greatest special op ever in history of mankind ever. But I don't,
Yes.
I don't,
I know.
I don't think it was. I think this was negotiations with the Maduro regime over the last 3 months. And by the way, again, God bless Trump. We're not taking anything away from him. It was the pressure on Venezuela over the last 3 months that got to the point where you can land an airplane, a helicopter on the grassy knoll, and some colonel is like, "Here's Maduro," like, and his wife, like,
Yeah.
"Take him, we good."
Well, and authored by the president of peace. Gallantly, I'm not so sure it's gallant. Like, I think we should reserve that word for more noble things. This is where but anyway, to go back to this, I mean, Trump's press conference was remarkable on several different levels. But this is also where I think on our forecast episode, I put out there that I thought there would be regime change in Venezuela, or I made that forecast. I'm not sure this is regime change, because if what you're saying is right, and I happen to agree with you, that this was some conspiracy to get rid of Maduro, it's not like Maria Corina Machado is going to be welcomed in as the leader, the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize that President Trump covets so much. In that press conference that we're alluding to, President Trump said about her, and I'll quote, "I think it'd be very tough for her to be the leader. She doesn't have the support or the respect within the country. She's a very nice woman, but she doesn't have the respect." So he's not talking about installing the Nobel Peace Prize winning Venezuelan dissident politician. He's literally saying that the United States will run the country itself. Again, I'll quote him, "We are going to run the country," quote unquote. And when asked if the U.S. could end up administrating Venezuela for years, his response is, "Well, it won't cost us anything because the money coming out of the ground is very substantial." Where is the Venezuelan military in all this? Do they get to control
I think they do.
the
No,
day-to-day, and it's just
you're
the
being
U.S.
you're
controls
being
the
very
oil
modest.
fields? Like,
You're being very modest.
I am.
Yes, I think it is regime change. Look,
Oh, that's nice.
yeah, like Desi Rodriguez, I believe, is the vice president of Venezuela. She apparently had a cordial conversation with Marco Rubio. She's a daughter. So her background is she's a daughter of a famous like Venezuelan guerrilla leader. You know what I mean? Like this woman is like Marxist. Although apparently one of the feathers in her hat is that she's been trying to like curb inflation through orthodox macroeconomic policy. God bless her. Great. What am I getting at? Yeah, if Desi Rodriguez goes from being like the daughter of a guerrilla leader to like, okay, what should I do, Marco? Like that is regime change. This is regime change. Because if the
Okay.
regime truly gave up Maduro, it also gave up a lot of other things, such as the alliances that Venezuela has had with Russia and China over the last 25 years, the unorthodox monetary policy, the unorthodox fiscal policy, all sorts of other things that go with running a Marxist failed state is out the window. And yeah, I think Desi Rodriguez may have the mental capacity to make that shift. So the regime change may be in the brains of people in Caracas, but that's good enough for Trump. And so when he says we're going to run the country, obviously liberal media is all over that. They want to paint this as the beginning of some quagmire like Vietnam or Iraq. It's like, no, there is another way to do that. The British Empire, famously, what you learned when you learn about 19th century in Britain, like 40 British officers ran Nigeria out of the Lagos like officers club, and they were half drunk. Read Burmese Days by George Orwell, right? You've got like 17 British officers getting smashed on gin every single day, and they're running the place. And that's what this is gonna be like. Like you just control the people in charge, and if they go out of line, you're like, well, let's see, Noriega, Maduro. Do you want to join him in maximum security prison in the United States? So like I think that's where we're headed, and I think your forecast was absolutely correct, as was, and I know you want to cook on this, so I'm just gonna lay it to you on a platter.
Yeah, please. please.
Marco Rubio was asked something about Cuba, and he was like, I think his answer was, well, if I was in Havana, I'd be very nervous. And your forecast was Venezuela regime change happens, but then there's like a domino of other such things in Latin America, with Cuba being the one that I think a lot of people are very interested in. So you would also, I think, nailed that one. The focus on Cuba now, like shifting.
Yeah, I'm going to splice in the Big Short clip of Ryan Gosling right now because this is where I am.
I'm jacked! I'm jacked to the tits!
Good.
You feel it?
No.
Yeah, so the forecast was a two-parter. It's not correct yet. I said Venezuela and I said Cuba. And I said it knowing that it's crazy that we did that 3 weeks ago, Marco, and it sounded crazy at the time. And now it sounds like, of course that's what they were doing. Look, they literally, the breadcrumbs were there for us all to follow. But no, I think Venezuela is the amuse-bouche. It's the appetizer. It's the dry run. It's the dress rehearsal, okay? Venezuela, ultimately, not of huge importance to the United States. It's a nice to have. They've got a lot of oil. If this is not financial advice, but if you are a long-term holder of Chevron stock, congrats to you. Things were great. If you're Guyana, this is a wonderful thing for you. Lots of different sort of winners there, but this is not an existential issue for U.S. foreign policy. The Chinese were already running around other places. The Chinese pose a much bigger problem in places like Peru, Argentina. We've talked about that in general. The true geopolitical prize for the United States, and it has been the geopolitical prize for the United States since Fidel Castro yanked it away from the United States, is Cuba. This is the thorn in the Gulf of America. This is the thing that can actually hurt the United States. This is the closest we came to nuclear holocaust because the Russians had missiles there and the Cuban Missile Crisis and everything else. This is the only real geopolitical weak point in the U.S.'s armor. The fact that it has something that is so close to the United States that is not aligned with the United States and is open for business with U.S. enemies, whether it's Russia or China or everybody else. And Marco Rubio, who is playing this Kissingerian role as the NSA director and as the Secretary of State, he's from that Florida, anti-Cuban revolutionary community. He is Cuban himself. He has this whole mythos around him, and it is partly myth that his family fled the Castro regime as a result of the revolution. Also, I mean, we talk more about Venezuela because Venezuela's orders of magnitude bigger than Cuba. So when people are fleeing Venezuela, that shows up in the migrant numbers. When you're looking at migration into the United States over the past couple of years, it wasn't Mexicans coming to the borders. It was your Central American states and Venezuelans. They were the ones who were most largely represented there. Cuba, much smaller, even though Cubans are coming and trying to get out and using Bitcoin and their regime is collapsing, like it's just not feeling as much. But the pressure has been there with Cuba. If you look back over the course of the last 5 years, they've had some pretty strange protest activity that you would have thought would have been locked down that wasn't locked down, whether it's surging inflation or high food prices or medicine shortages and things like that. The writing has been on the wall that the people are not supporting Cuba in general. And this is something that's been, Rubio's modus vivendi the whole time. And if you're thinking about like true frontier opportunity, like Venezuela's tough. Like, sure, your Chevrons and your Exxon Mobil's oil, they can turn up all that oil infrastructure and they can do some things there, but that's tough. It's not going to be easy to make that much money. Cuba, it's fine. Like go buy some condos and rent them out on Airbnb. You're going to make an absolute killing. Like this is a country that is stuck in the 1950s. This is one of the only true frontier economies that is left, and it's just sitting there. Aside from everything else with the geopolitics, so it's the real. I think it's the real geopolitical prize here, and they should be on notice in Havana. If the United States can do this to Maduro, they can certainly do it to. God, I'm forgetting.
Nobody cares. That's how vulnerable he is. We don't even know the president's name.
All right. Well, Miguel Diaz-Canel. They're coming for you, bro. I'm sorry.
So a couple of things that I would say about what you just said. Monroe Doctrine gets brought up a lot. Like Trump is resurrecting the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine never went away. The U.S. just filled the Middle East with extraordinary amount of human capital and treasure and military equipment. The U.S. has been distracted. Like, could the U.S. have done this 20 years ago? Yes, but it took this hard turn into the quagmire of the Middle East, fighting land wars in Asia, which Princess Bride told us never to do. Another movie reference we might have wanted to bring in. But to what extent is Cuba really a geopolitical prize? The United States of America has not had control over Cuba. since 1950s, and it hasn't hurt the United States one bit in any way, shape, or form. Yeah, Soviets put weapons on it, but that was not really about Cuba, US. That was about Soviet Union, US. US smacked the Soviet Union over those 13 days. Those weapons were withdrawn, and Cuba remained a thorn in America's sort of side, but it's a thorn that the US has developed a very strong calluses over. Like nobody cares.
No, nobody's been able to use it, but I think you're underestimating the level of economic impact for U.S. companies that were in Cuba that left because of the
But that's different.
nationalizations and
Yeah,
everything else.
that's where I was going.
You know? Yeah, sorry. Go ahead then. Sorry.
So no, I agree with that. So to me, Cuba's really an economic, like, interesting story, right? It's a piece of the Caribbean. It's the largest island, I believe, in the Caribbean. Lots of real estate, 10 million people. Um, it's a really interesting piece of real estate. And anyone who is a big movie lover would remember, again, another movie we forgot, The Godfather. Godfather 2, the whole plot is really centered around Hyman Roth's designs to turn Cuba into what Vegas became, right? And if you want to ask yourself, why did the mob all go to Vegas? Well, because they couldn't go to Cuba because the communists showed up. And so there's this wonderful scene. I just posted it on X, where they bring out the cake in the shape of Cuba for Hyman Roth. And obviously, Michael sees something wrong, right? And he's like, "Wait a minute, like, there's actual revolution here. Like, we should probably not invest in this hellhole." So my point about all of this is just, I think that Cuba could be next. I'm just not sure that any of this is that geopolitically relevant. Evicting China and
No.
Russia out of Venezuela may be bigger than Cuba, just because Venezuela at least does have some natural resources. It's a bigger country. It can project power. If it were not to be a failed state, if Marxism worked, you know what I mean? I think Venezuela is a bigger prize than Cuba, just because it is much larger country, much more resources. It can self-finance its own military, its own trouble, its own drug cartels, and so on. But I agree with you that the sequence Venezuela-Cuba is likely, and I also agree with you that um, it's not like it's a negative for the United States. I'm not saying that. I just don't want us to overstate the Monroe Doctrine. It's not like the United States of America somehow was on the back foot in Latin America and Central America. It's not like these countries
I'm a-
threatened the U.S. in any way, right? That's all I'm saying.
Well, I'm gonna disagree with you a little bit because I think that I think the analogy is the United States is to Cuba as China is to Taiwan, because you can say the same thing about China. Like, it hasn't actually materially hurt China's rise, the fact that Taiwan is separate, and that the United States has armed it and everything else. Like, it hasn't actually imposed that big of a cost, but it's the same sort of thing. It's just something that you have to prepare for, that's there when you're thinking about U.S. power projecting into the Caribbean. Like, you don't have control over it. Like, the Bay of Pigs was a major failure. This is a no-go zone for the United States. And maybe it hasn't materially hurt the United States, but it is literally the only weakness on the board in North America. Venezuela, the Chinese had already pulled out. I think the Chinese weren't messing around with Maduro anymore.
Yeah.
It was all virtue signaling.
Well, they were
They're
buying
doing other
oil.
things that are. Yeah, like, whatever. Like, fine. The Russians were there, but who cares about the Russians? Like, they have the Russians have these dreams that running around the Central African Republic and Venezuela, they're going to somehow project power. Like, okay, Vladimir, like, you're just high on your own supply right now. Like, none of that was material. Cuba, if there's a foreign force that's in Cuba, or if you can't control Cuba, there's that. Also, just to say, Cuba has plenty of resources of its own. It's one of the biggest reserves of nickel in the entire world. Elon Musk is baiting himself in ketamine or whatever it is he likes to party with, because he's looking at the nickel batteries and everything else, and he's having a really good time. There's offshore oil and gas. I know this isn't top of mind, but we're thinking about fisheries and aquaculture. Cuba's at the top. You're thinking about sugar or tobacco. Like, these are all major cash industries there. And then they've got a bunch of other minerals that maybe haven't been developed as much, but when you're thinking about rare earths and critical minerals and things like that, I mean, Cuba actually has significant reserves of some of these things. Even cobalt has been sort of floated there, although I think that would take a lot of development. So it's not a zero prize. Like, there's actually a lot of economic activity that the United States could get out of it, and it's probably one of the reasons that the United States is thinking about it. There's also, by the way, there's coherence here to the Trump administration's point of view. Okay, start with Caracas, but it's not going to end at Caracas. Then you have to deal with the cartels, and we have to deal with Cuba, and we have to deal with Greenland. Like, you start looking at the map and looking at the focus on the Western Hemisphere, like, it's, there is coherence to it. I can't deny it.
What I would say is that the big difference between Cuba and Taiwan is that the United States of America has a military base in Cuba. So like, let's pump the brakes a little bit on like the equivalence. Taiwan is a sophisticated first world country with like fucking rockets, you know? If we have another situation where somebody puts something on Cuba, like the US will carpet bomb them tomorrow. To an extent, China can do the same with Taiwan. I just don't think that the two are really quick. Like, it's just not, it hasn't, it is very clear that Cuba has not impeded American power. In fact, at the height of American power, at the height of it, in the 90s and the 2000s, America looked beyond Cuba, right? You're almost more correct because American power has declined. Now, geography is not completely irrelevant. Like, I agree with you. There is this strip of land, quite large, in the Caribbean, which is not controlled by the US. And therefore, again, I don't disagree that there's coherence. I don't disagree that there's a net positive for the United States if you were to take over Cuba. I just want to pump the brakes a little bit on tying Trump with the Monroe Doctrine. What irks me, what irks me about it is that it's always been there. It's always been relevant. And there's always been countries that did not abide by the American line. There's always been a country south of the Rio Grande that went against American interests. So you can never say that any president ever fully had Monroe Doctrine in place. President Trump is trying to do that now. But if he fails, let me put it this way. If Trump were to fail, if your forecast ends up being wrong and Havana doesn't, I'm not going to eat his lunch for that. I'm not going to criticize President Trump for not finally turning Cuba into what Hyman Roth dreamed of.
I think there's a much higher likelihood that Cuba becomes the 51st state before Canada does. Like, I think that's actually, or the interesting thing is what becomes the 51st state first? Is it Puerto Rico or Cuba? It's also just naked imperialism, by the way. Like, this is what I meant at the very beginning about the clutching of pearls. Like, just strip it all away. What is it? It is just plain imperialism. Before we start moving to some of the other geopolitical considerations, I also just want to talk for a second about Latin America, because this is another one of my takes right now, which is, there is a rising, I don't even want to call it conservative. It's certainly not leftist. It's pro-Trump. You can see, we talked about it with the Chilean elections. We'll see what happens in Brazil's elections. We're seeing it in polling for Peru's elections. Javier Milei and the chainsaw. All of these Trump style figures. Nayib Bukele, my number one leader in our geopolitical pyramid. Just because there is temporary alignment between these leaders and Trump, none of them should feel safe either. Because one of the things about this is the Trump administration is putting every single Latin American leader on notice, which is to say, this can happen to you too if you don't go along with us. Look how easy it was for us to do this to Venezuela. You think that you're going to go against us and it's not going to be easy for us to do it to you too? And the reason I think this should really concern some of these leaders is because Donald Trump will not be president of the United States in perpetuity. And this Pandora's box that he opened is not going to be closed once he leaves office. Even, let's say AOC wins the next election. I don't think that's going to happen, but just for the sake of argument, if AOC wins the next election, she will also govern in Latin America like this. The U.S., it's open season now in Latin America, I think, for the United States. And if you are on the wrong side of Washington, Washington is basically saying, hey, if you're in the Western Hemisphere, if you're in the Monroe Doctrine geographic alignment, we will find a reason to come in, and it doesn't have to be war. Fine, we'll say that you're dealing drugs. We'll get you on gun charges. It doesn't matter. We will figure something out. But we will come and get you.
In AOC's case, she might get you on the LGBTQ policy.
She might.
So it doesn't really matter what America gets you on. It will get you on something. I think one thing that I think is very difficult for people to understand, and this is why I hate the Monroe Doctrine as a tool of analysis. It makes it seem like the Trump administration is super smart. The United States of America is focusing on Latin America because it's weaker in relative terms globally. So a lot of liberals criticize President Trump for imperialism. I mean, you also mentioned this is open imperialism. Fine, it is, but it's imperialism closer at home because you got your face bashed in further afield. Like the Middle East was disastrous endeavor for the United States, and it's pretty clear that China is a peer competitor in East Asia, not globally. China is not global peer, but in East Asia, it's like 50-50. So the US and then the conservative view is like somehow this Monroe Doctrine is brilliant. It's a Monroe Doctrine. Like, no. This is just like globally speaking, the US is relatively more weaker. So what it's doing is it's putting its chips closer at home. And I mean, and it's not a criticism. You know what would be a criticism? If President Trump had tripled down on imperial overstretch policies of the Biden and to an extent Obama and definitely George W. Bush administrations, where you triple down on your endeavors in far afield where you don't need it. So this is like the Monroe Doctrine thing is annoying to me because it gives credence. Like there's an intellectual, philosophical line of thinking here. It isn't. It's just like, what's close at home? Where is nickel? Well, nickel, President Trump is mostly in Russia, but there's some in Cuba. Cool. That's nearer. You know what I mean? Like that's why my pet peeve about this is like, oh, it's all Monroe Doctrine. No, the US just got smacked in the Middle East. It's afraid of challenging China, let's be clear. And it's like, well, what's available? South of Rio Grande, baby. The old filibusters, and not in the congressional sense.
Well, and also, I mean, we're also fooling around in sub-Saharan Africa. I mean, one of the things that happened over the break was we just started bombing Nigeria because President Trump wants to defend the
I don't
Christians
know,
there,
but see,
which is not.
But see, that and Iran, those two actions I actually don't consider in any way that coherent. Now, we should talk about Iran in a second, but like, I think that this is different. Like Nigeria was like, I think President Trump watched the Fox News like report and just bombed someone. Like that.
Yeah, no,
That's not
I
like
agree with that. And I'm just trying to say that the two places that are open are south of the Rio Grande and sub-Saharan Africa. And China's already won most of sub-Saharan Africa. So if you want to play, you can either play in sub-Saharan Africa or you can play in Latin America. The United States is choosing to play in Latin America. And I think China's going to play in sub-Saharan Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa is where the great game might really happen if a future U.S. administration decides that it wants to combat China in sub-Saharan Africa. Then you can get a redux of what happened with the Soviets and the United States in the DRC in the 1950s with Patrice Lumumba. Like it's a chapter of history that I think people forget because of Vietnam. Like the original Vietnam was Congo. It could have happened there. It moved to Vietnam for a bunch of really circumstantial issues, but like it's kind of there too. And I just want to double down on what you said. No, this is not smart policy. None of these people are smart. That I think most people are stupid, and I think these people are stupid too. Both the virtue and the weakness of this policy, it is unscrupulous, it is unprincipled.
So let's
there is
double-click on
no
that.
shame.
Yeah.
They're literally just like, oh, Venezuela has oil. They've been giving us the middle finger. They've been letting the Russians and the Chinese here. What? Come on, let's take these. They're not going to fight us. Let's take this shit back.
Let's double-click on that.
Oh, yeah, please double-click on it.
So first of all, before we double-click on that, just very quickly, Jacob just mentioned the Congo. Great movie. Another one. I keep thinking of movies we did not mention. The Siege.
Okay,
The Siege of Jadotville. Incredible movie. Incredible movie. And it's about an Irish contingent of Irish soldiers serving under the UN who defended their post against overwhelming forces made up of Congolese fighters and French mercenaries. Very interesting. So French mercenaries and Irish fought in this 1961 battle. Crazy. So Congo, by the way, back then it was about copper. Today it's all about cobalt. Yep. So great reference. Now,
and before that it was about rubber. It's always something in the
So let's talk about this point, because you started the podcast by giving Trump a slow clap, golf clap.
I did.
For the unscrupulousness. But now there's a criticism. So let's unpack why is there criticism. I, as you, want to slow clap the lack of hypocrisy here. The problem, however, and this is something that I think the United States has to be aware of. I mean, this is always the problem. The problem is other countries can do this too now.
Yes.
And the real problem is that we don't know into the future where natural resources, capabilities, and technological innovation is necessarily stored. We just don't know. And there was, since the fall of the Soviet Union, there was a consensus, a norm. The natural resources, for the most part, are freely traded on the open global market. Like, you don't need to go and capture like a piece, like an oil field. You can just go get your energy companies to develop it. You know, maybe you pay some vice president to give you the rights over a Chinese company, but at the end of the day, you exploit that field, and then the oil barrel may actually end up in China. Like Exxon may end up developing a field that mainly serves the Chinese market. You know, like we are entering this world that's like Age of Empires. I don't know how many of you played this computer game, but like, you know, the whole point of Age of Empires is you got to go get the gold mine, get the iron mine to like actually get the resources to defeat your opponent. And the problem with that, I mean, it's not really a problem, but like the reality of that is that it will take resources off the global market, which will increase permanently the price. So even if the United States of America successfully captures Venezuelan oil reserves, the oil prices it pays for that will go up. You know, this is where I think the biggest adage right now. I know we don't talk markets, but I'm just going to say it because everybody is talking about this. Oh, this is about lowering oil prices. This is about lowering oil prices. Well, we're going to get so much oil. First of all, this is a country that for 30 years has been run by Marxist morons, okay, who wear red shirts to work because they want to show how fucking Marxist they are. You're not going to turn on Venezuelan oil supply in a second. It's going to take a long time. Second of all, in terms of exports, Venezuela exports 900,000 barrels per day. At its maximum, in I believe late 90s, it was 2 million. So you're not talking that much more. You're talking doubling of production. That's insignificant. We're talking 1.5% of global supply, maybe extra. Saudi Arabia is going to press a button on their dashboard and make sure the prices are stable. Like there's not going to be any impact on oil prices over the long term. Maybe on Monday, when you wake up, you're going to be like, wow, Marko's a moron. Oil prices went down 7%. Yes, because every degenerate in Robinhood thought oil prices will fall. There is no way we're going to get more oil out of Venezuela, significantly more. And if we do, the longer term implication that we're now in Age of Empires world where countries are going to take commodities off the global market is far more important than what happens with an extra million barrels of production in Venezuela. So I think you've nailed the real significance of that language that was used at the press conference. It's not just you and I are here sitting, maybe you are, I'm a nihilist, so, you know, I don't have that bone in my body, but it's not like we're sitting here and being like, oh, you're so mean. It's more like that old norm of like, hey, colonialism is bad. Like there was a reason that we developed that norm. And it's not because we were all just woke liberal morons.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a nihilist, but I am deeply cynical about U.S. foreign policy, and I'm a realist about what it is. So, like, the slow clap is for, yes, like, strip the varnish away. Let's stop pretending like we're so noble and so exceptional compared to everyone else, because we're not. We do the same things, and this move where we cover ourselves, not just in the flag, but in universal principles of liberty and freedom of expression and all these other things, and we're doing this for those principles. Like you know, give me a break with that. I think you're right about Venezuelan oil itself, which is to say, even if they get all the infrastructure working, like Venezuelan crude is difficult to process. If you have a choice of all the different crudes that are out there for export, unless you have an industry that is able to process Venezuelan crude, like that's not the one you're going to go for. I think the one indirect effect it could have is that Guyana, and I'll quote ExxonMobil here, I believe in 2017 they said this, had a fairy tale discovery of oil.
Yeah.
That's going to be one of the richest petrostates in the entire world. And the Venezuelan military was burying its teeth at Guyana. The Maduro regime was saying, hey, this is disputed land. We want to go after this oil infrastructure. You don't have to worry. If you're Chevron or ExxonMobil and you're in Guyana, you don't have to worry anymore. That's done. So any uncertainty that you felt, now Guyana can just pump as much. They probably were going to do that anyway. So there's like a little indirect effect that maybe you can take there. But there's 3 points I want to say into what you're saying. The first is something you said earlier, but I just want to double click on it, which you talked about U.S. relative power. I'm going to call top today, January 3rd, 2026, on U.S. power. This is the top.
Wow.
This is the zenith. if you
so mean.
have to do this, you're not as powerful as you think. I'm sure there is a Sun Tzu quote that we could say, if you have to fire the shot, you've lost the war in the long run. The real one, which is, Trump wanted to, we talk about the Monroe Doctrine. I'm going to keep bringing this up. There's a Roosevelt corollary. Like, we're just forgetting that Teddy Roosevelt existed. This guy was one of the most influential presidents in U.S. history. He was here first, y'all. We got to give him some respect. Say his name. What was one of his things? Aside from the Roosevelt corollary in Latin America, speak softly and carry a big stick. He was not afraid of using the big stick, but his entire foreign policy was, no, like, if I have to use the big stick, I will. But just the fact that I'm saying something should mean something in these parts of the world. And he was willing to demonstrate that in certain countries and made an example of them, and then all of these other countries fell in line. Remember the Rough Riders and him running around Cuba? Cuba wasn't a problem for another 40, 50 years because of the Teddy Roosevelt approach. The Trump approach is wield a big stick and brag about it. And that's cool for short-termism. And that's what I mean about the unscrupulousness and the lack of shame. Like, yeah, it's both a strength and a weakness, because it's telling you that, okay, like, we're taking advantage of it now, because now is the peak of U.S. relative power. We're only downhill from here, so we have to use what we have now, because the longer the clock is ticking, the more the Chinese are coming,
Well, that's
the more
why
the
also
Europeans are waking up, the more these,
just
Brazil might wake up and decide they need a military. Like,
I know you
yeah,
have two
go.
more. I know you have two more points. This will be just very brief. I just want to say, it's when you have this sense that your power is eroding that you become more of a Age of Empires type of a player. Like, you start looking at like resources that are close at hand, and like Greenland becomes relevant suddenly. The United States of America of 1995 is like, what the fuck is Greenland? Like, we don't need it. We control the world. But when you don't control the world, suddenly Cuban nickel, like, becomes interesting.
Yeah. Well, and just to say, like, who is the largest trading partner for most South American countries? It's
China.
China.
Yeah, it's
It
China.
doesn't matter that all these Trump-loving, Trump-imitating
No.
leaders are coming to power. It's a short-term thing. If you look at the region for the next 2 to 3 years, it's going to look great. It's going to look like Trump and his cronies are geniuses, that they have figured it all out. But in the long run,
Yeah.
all they have done is confirm for the region that this is not a country that you can respect. And by the way, we've already jettisoned the United States. We're not now. If you're Colombia, this sucks, because Colombia is still, like, their top trading chip is the United States. But if you're not Colombia,
But that's
like,
interesting,
you're
Jacob.
doing.
What's interesting
Go ahead.
about what you're saying is that it's both true and it's also almost impossible to reverse. Like,
Yeah.
if Donald Trump puts Barron in charge of Venezuela, I'm pretty sure that within 6 months, Barron is calling Washington, D.C. and being like, bro, I got to work with China. You put me in charge of this enterprise. I want it to succeed because I'm in charge. I got to trade. Like, that's what happened to Milei. Milei talked all sorts of anti-China stuff before he became the president of Argentina, and then his administration has actually worked cordially with China. To your point, it's very difficult because these trade relationships are based on demand and supply. If I'm Chile and I make a lot of copper, and China is still in the process of developing like industrialization and infrastructure and so on, I'm going to sell them copper. United States of America, what are they going to offer me? You need to then start rebuilding American infrastructure, create demand for copper. You can't just tell Chile, "Hey, stop trading with China." But then who's going to buy my copper? You know what I mean? I don't sell toaster ovens. I don't sell pool linings. I don't sell ski equipment. I sell copper. And that's that natural resource relationship that Latin America will continue to have with China, no matter what happens. I think that's a great point.
Well, and the key for Latin American countries, because one of the reasons Chile got caught in the Cold War and Allende was overthrown and everything else was because they got caught between the Soviets and the United States. If you're a Latin American country and you're in the foreign policy establishment and you're listening to this, your chief goal has to not be in either one of these camps. You have to try and become something more than a depot for commodities.
And I think that's
and
easy.
Chile's trying to do this.
I think look, listen. That's not difficult to do. Do business with China. No, listen. I
They
think
haven't done it for 100 years.
I think it's like, just do business with China, but obviously don't be a Marxist hellhole that's a haven for cartels. Like, I mean, that's where Trump is, like, objectively right. And by the way, it's not like the Obama or the Biden administrations had a good relationship with Venezuela, right? So, like, what's the reality here? Venezuela both did business with China and decided to be a Marxist hellhole that was a haven for drug cartels. And so it's kind of easy. Like, all you got to do is sell your stuff to China and then like, say the right things at the global forums in terms of your outlook on geopolitics. Like, be neutral, just make money.
Yeah, well, but my point is just that, because Chile is a really good example, because you're right, they're selling copper. They haven't been a Marxist state for the
No.
last 20. They had, the Pinochet government. This is the Chicago School of Economics, wet dream. They've been everything else, and they're still a copper dependent economy. They still, I believe, I don't think they're the lowest, but they're in like the bottom, 5% of OECD countries that are spending on research and development in their economy based on GDP. Like, they're just not doing anything. And if these countries want to become something more than, countries that are competed for by the United States and China, they have to have domestic economies that are more sophisticated. And that doesn't happen. That has not happened yet.
No, you're totally right. I mean, that's a podcast for the next hour. You know what I mean? Like, on economic development, it's just difficult, but I agree with you. And the first thing they all have to do is start taxing better, because they are under-taxed economies. The reason they don't spend on research and development, on education, on healthcare, is because they just don't tax. In many ways, like, Mexico is actually a wet dream of the sort of Republican Party of Norquist, like, it literally, like, 2% of the population is taxed. It's severely under-taxed economy that obviously can't provide public services properly, and then what happens is cartels come and fill the gap. Anyways, I've taken you off your 3 points. You got 2 more. Go ahead.
No. You were good, actually. I made them, but so I do want us to land the plane a little bit. So I want to take a little bit of a step back, and you alluded to this because Iran is part of this. But if you're a leader in the world like Kim Jong-un or Vladimir Putin, or for different reasons Benjamin Netanyahu, or really if you're the supreme leader of Iran, I think you should be on notice. You should be feeling a little bit nervous. The country that this could really happen to next, I'm looking at Iran right now. They're getting another round of protests, which is hard to make heads or tails of whether they're real protests or whether the diaspora is manipulating the information. But if I'm Israel, and I have good relations with the Trump administration, maybe I knew what was coming, or I was able to predict what was coming. What's to stop Israeli helicopters from going and picking up the supreme leader now that this precedent has been set? And if in a multiverse 20 years from now, where China, this is not going to happen, but what if China's the top dog, or Turkey is the top dog in the world, and they decide, we're going to go get this Benjamin Netanyahu guy on those war crimes things. We're going to take him to The Hague and parade him in front of everyone. Like, that's the world we've opened up here. So just be careful. Just be careful if you're one of these guys.
Well, that's why, Jacob, I think there's 2 ways to look at this, and they're very different. So let me cook on this, because I think there's really 2 things. One, the conspiracy theory you and I cooked on is real. This is all Hollywood. 3 months, 4 months worth of intense American pressure, which included military actions in the Caribbean, convinced the military of Venezuela to give up Maduro. It's not really regime change. The equivalent would be if the mullahs in Iran, if the theocracy gave up Khomeini, but actually replaced him with someone like a little bit more moderate, I still give you credit for regime change. But the point is, if there was a conspiracy theory here that is at work, and there was actually serious negotiations, and everything else is just Hollywood and theater, then no, this won't be replicated anywhere else unless there are insiders willing to give up the titular heads of those regimes. On the other hand, what if our conspiracy theory is wrong? What if the United States Special Forces just are fucking awesome, and we've got real life Chuck Norrises, like, ziplining off of Black Hawks? Now, here's the issue with that. First of all, that's awesome. Cool. The problem is that I think that we need a Chuck Norris premium, as I told my clients today. So everybody wants to short oil now because of this comically simplistic view that somehow American oil companies are in Venezuela tomorrow and we will be awash in oil. Let me just be very clear. That's a fantasy. Instead, what might happen is what you are talking about, which is that a whole bunch of other leaders, primarily the Iranians, because you're right, there are protests in Iran, and most shockingly, a couple of days ago, President Trump said that he would militarily intervene on behalf of those protesters if Iranian regime cracks down on them, which they're certain to do. So here's the truth. Oil prices didn't budge 12 months ago last year when Israel and the United States attacked Iran. You and I had 3 emergency podcasts about this.
Yep.
We talked about it. You and I were both on the same page. Like, this will not have any major implications. We're one of the very few geopolitical strategists out there to say, we'll go long oil. But one of the reasons for that is that regime change was not in the cards. Netanyahu flirted with it, but it's Israel. How are you going to effect regime change? Sorry, this isn't Hezbollah with pagers.
Well, no. Apparently, all you have to do is fly the helicopters into Tehran and get the supreme leader.
Maybe.
Why not?
Maybe. Depends. Like, is Iran Venezuela? My point is that last year, it just wasn't on the cards. President Trump basically told Bibi, stop that nonsense. President Trump was very clear last year. Very clear. This is not about regime change. And in fact, as I keep repeating to our listeners, he ended his address after the attack by saying, God bless Iran. Fast forward to January 3rd. Is President Trump now going to be like, oh, apparently, as you just said, we should splice in what you just said. Apparently, all I need is to land some helicopters and let out our Chuck Norrises. And this is why I think we're now in a world where a Chuck Norris premium has to be applied to all sorts of financial assets, including oil prices. Because my fear right now is the fear of success. Why did America invade Iraq? And this is just my pet theory, by the way. Just hear me out. My pet theory is that we invaded Iraq because invading Afghanistan was so fucking successful. The operation of Afghanistan, you took, some special operation forces, got embedded with the Northern Alliance, using FSB, Russian intelligence, God bless Putin, and boom, in 2 weeks of combat, the Taliban were done. And so what happened was the Cheneys of the world, the Wolfowitz of the world, opened up the map of the Middle East and said, what the fuck can we do next? We're on a roll here, baby. Let's go. So I don't actually think that there was some insidious plan to invade Iraq from September 12th onwards. I believe that it kind of organically happened because Afghanistan was so brilliantly executed. Similarly, right now, Pete Hegseth, Marco Rubio, and Donald Trump are like, holy shit. Again, if this is not a conspiracy theory, if this actually was just Chuck Norris ziplining down a helicopter, they're sitting there being like, okay, so Iran? And then to answer your question, Jacob, just like Iraq turned out not to be Afghanistan, I'm pretty sure there's a limited number of countries that are going to turn out the way Maduro and Venezuela did. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you can do this in Pyongyang. I mean, maybe we're wrong, but I don't think you could pull this off in North Korea. But I'm not even talking about the United States. If I'm the Israelis and I'm watching this movie, we can absolutely do this to the supreme leader.
I disagree.
That's easy.
I disagree.
We have the intel. We obliterated the air defense. We showed that there was no air defense in Tehran to speak of.
I massively
we just have to get the guy and get him out?
No.
Why not?
Massively
and if I'm Ukraine, I'm sitting there going, can we get to Putin?
No.
You can't. How do we get to him?
Look, first of all, maybe you can kill somebody. Okay. I think Israelis can kill the supreme leader of Iran. I think that's a fair game. But to actually then exert the massive amount of pressure to also tell them, hey, can you become a liberal democracy like Wisconsin? Fuck no, Israel doesn't have the power to do that. It just doesn't, fucking putting bombs.
Neither do we.
Well, the U.S. does when it comes to Venezuela.
No, it doesn't.
In Venezuela.
No, they're not going to be a liberal democracy.
No. Not a liberal democracy.
It's going to be the same old regime that it was before.
Well, but pro-American, yes. Look, the difference between Israel and the United States is that the United States of America has an aircraft carrier with 80 fourth-generation fighter jets off the coast of Venezuela. And, capturing Maduro was just like a cherry on the cake. It's like, we can do this for years now. We can make your life miserable. Iran's life has already been miserable. It's already engaged in a war with Israel. Israel ran out of fucking rockets, by the way. One of the reasons Trump had, so my point is, Israel by itself can't do this to Iran. I think the U.S. could. The thing is, it's going to get messy. And this is why I think if the Chuck Norris analogy makes sense, if this is like Afghanistan was successful, let's go to Iraq, we got to be very careful. And the reason I say that is that then there will be a calamity. And everyone who's sitting there cheerleading $40 oil right now should be ready for $100 oil. Because again, the reason you and I were right last year is because regime change wasn't on the table. If the regime change is on the table, I'm not sure that the Iranians are not going to do something pretty dramatic if they're existentially threatened, such as attacking Saudi Arabia, which is right across the Gulf.
Yeah, I think I hear you. The thing that I'm saying, this is the reason why I think Cuba is in the cards and why I think Iran
Yes, it's
could be.
easier.
I'm not saying it is. I think you might have factions within the current regimes in both of those countries who are ready to give up the figureheads. Like one of the things that happened with Iran was embarrassed. The supreme leader's government was embarrassed. There are probably factions within the Iranian military that wouldn't mind giving him up. So if you can make contact with those people, and then you've got the protests, and you've got President Trump out there, can you convince yourself that if you can at least get the intel to the Americans of where he is, can you work together to get him out? And then you've got enough, which is why I say it's not going to work with North Korea. A, you're not going to get there. B, you're not going to have the intel. C, there's no sign that people are, like, nobody's reaching out to you being like, hey, we want to get rid of this guy. Like, if they are, they're getting shot out of anti-aircraft guns, one of his favorite ways to execute people. But Cuba and Iran, those are regimes that you have red alerts for regime weakness. Like there are absolutely people there who would be willing to sell out the top leadership. So like,
no, I agree with that.
And by the way, I think this goes for Lukashenko too. Like, I don't think there's a European actor that is ready to do this, but like, would not be, the Poles are like, literally, like they can't get over themselves right now. Like they're like, they want to do this right now to Lukashenko, you know?
So what you're describing is a way in which this would be much less volatile for the global economy. I mean, but it's also like more of that conspiracy theory line.
Yes,
like there's again, as I said, there's a bifurcated way to think about this. If this really was just a success of special operations with minimal intervention of domestic regime, then the global economy is fucked. If the United States of America just sends a Chuck Norris to Iran, like Iran will burn down oil infrastructure. But if there is an opening domestically, and if this actually was kind of a little bit of both, then I think you're right. Like this could actually be done. And Lukashenko was somebody who was on my mind a couple of months ago. I mean, I talked to a client about that. Belarus is like a very weak regime. You know, they've had these protests and elections that they've had to cheat. It's 10 million people or stretched over a very large territory. It's barely controls itself. It's definitely something like you could buy Lukashenko with like a nice John Deere, like if John Deere could buy Belarus. Like let's just put it that way.
Yeah. Okay. Before we get out of here.
Oh, one last.
I also. Oh yeah. Go ahead.
Well, one last corollary here. You know,
Please.
You took us to Iran. The obvious one that's all over social media that we cannot not mention is Taiwan.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Let's do that before we do Yemen, because I was going to transition us to Yemen.
Yeah.
So let's do Taiwan.
So I think Taiwan, is also a good one, just because everyone's saying, well, okay, hold on. So like if the Monroe Doctrine is in effect, if America is like focusing on its near abroad and its sphere of influence, was there a trade? You know, did the United States of America send Taiwan and a future pick swap in exchange for like Venezuela and Cuba? Right? And
that's good.
And the first thing I would say about that is like, I don't think that China hesitates to attack Taiwan purely because of American response. I think that's a big, big, big part of it. But it's not the only thing that holds China's hand against attacking Taiwan. It's not just about the US, it's also a response of the rest of the world. The second thing is there isn't really indication that that happened. The President Trump national security strategy, which I thought was well written, you know, I'm in a minority, but fine, was very clear in that national security strategy that Taiwan is still a red line for the United States of America. So unless they've changed their mind after Chuck Norris thing, like maybe, I don't know. And then the final thing I want to point out.
Truman did. Truman did. Like South Korea was not part of US, like we said that, and then we changed our minds. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Well, and that's ultimately the problem, right? Ultimately, the danger for the Chinese is you can't really react to President Trump's words, which I keep telling my clients in the financial industry. Just because he says he wants to like change the way trade works, you can't invest based on that. You gotta focus on capabilities. As long as the United States of America has the capability to make your life miserable in invading Taiwan, you should focus on that. Because exactly what you just said, Jacob, Truman says, I don't care, and then he does. You know, the American ambassador to Iraq says, oh, Saddam, you want to invade Kuwait? Go ahead. and then it kind of cares. Similarly, you could walk into a massive trap if you're China and you're like, "Oh, we made this deal," and then the Americans rescind the deal and send, Williams back and take Connect back because of like medical reasons. In other words, the Americans say, "We were just kidding about the trade, and you just broke international law by invading Taiwan, and we're not going to support Taiwan in a significant way, and it's going to be your Ukraine. We're going to use it to bleed you." So if you're President Xi, and if you're listening to this podcast, what you should take from this is like America has a long tradition of this bait and switch. Like, oh, cool, we don't care. Oh, fuck, yeah, we do. And now you're in trap.
Yeah, I'm going to be even more extreme than you here. This changes absolutely zero for China. This is not good. If anything, it is good because it's showing them that the U.S. is in imperial decline. We've got rising measles cases, and they're running around, Caracas and doing things like this is a late
Jacob and
stage
his
capitalist power that is just going. Yeah, I'm going to beat the dead horse. There is no Monroe Doctrine equivalent for China in Southeast Asia or in the South China Sea. Like there's a
Interesting.
9-dash line. Like yes, they want to claim those
That's
things
an
there.
interesting point.
But to these, we have the Monroe Doctrine. You know what they have? They have, let's call it the Hong Kong Doctrine. Look at how they took Hong Kong. They did it with, and you can do all your Sun Tzu quotes here as you want. They took Hong Kong without firing a shot. When Margaret Thatcher went to renegotiate the British lease on Hong Kong, by the time she got there, the Chinese controlled all the infrastructure, all the access. They had their political, like everything was already theirs. And they basically said to Thatcher, who needed a big win, she went and got it in the Falklands anyway. But this is a rabid nationalist trying to prove that Britain was still great. They basically said to her, okay, you can renew the lease, but we're going to shut off the water and the electricity, and we're going to blockade it, and we'll destroy everything on our way out. Sound good? You want it back? And Thatcher had to cry uncle. She had to say, okay, that's not
You know
really
what?
going to work. And then you had one country, two systems for 30 years. And then what China's doing with Taiwan is that it's going to be a 30-year time horizon. If they have to fire a shot in Taiwan, they failed. What they're doing right now is they're draining Taiwan of their smartest people. They're putting them up in penthouses in Shanghai. They're getting rid of their advantage on semiconductors. They're slowly chipping away at the countries that recognize them or care about them or anything else. And when nobody cares about the Taiwanese anymore, which will probably take a couple of decades, they will absorb it the same way that they did Hong Kong. And maybe they'll have, one country, two systems for Taiwan for another 30 years after that. But this is not what China's after. They watched what happened with Ukraine. They're watching what the U.S. is doing. This is not a Western country. They are not imperialists. They were imperialized. Is that a word? Probably not. They think about this completely differently. And I don't think this means a damn thing about Taiwan. And if they did make some kind of trade, I think they're the ones who didn't mean any of it, because they weren't going to do anything with it in the first place.
My realist background prevents me from being as culturalist as you are. I don't like the idea that countries think differently. But I do think that you're correct, just because the risk reward is just too high. Because you're on the path towards what you're describing. Why would you get off that path and risk deaths and so on and destruction? They do military exercises quite often. I don't think that that's just for show. I think they want to have the option of acting like an American, like a Western imperialist power. But like in Civilization 2 or Civilization 4, my favorite computer game ever, there's two ways to conquer countries. One is outright military invasion. The other one is what you're describing, which is your borders just naturally expand because of your cultural and economic supremacy. And I think you're right about that. So,
well, and they need the drills, but they're not ready to conquer Taiwan. And for what I'm talking about to work, they have to have a credible threat. I don't think they have a credible threat yet. So they absolutely need to build a credible threat. But if they have to use it, they have failed, and they're not as strong as they want to be. What they're doing right now with the military drills is practice. I'm talking about practice.
You're talking
the
about
US
practice?
version of this is we don't need to do practice.
Not
We
a
just go in
game.
with the helicopters and we're good.
Not a
We're
game.
Allen Iverson here, and they're I don't know, what's some guy who had all the fundamentals? They're like Mark Price or something, or John Stockton. That's what China's doing here.
Not
They're
a
just
game.
practicing. They're just doing their chest passes and bounce passes and making sure they can do all the dribble drills. That's all they're doing around Taiwan. Okay, before my children wake up from their naps, I do just want to turn to what's happening in Yemen, and I'm gonna do another rant here, Marco, because I know you're on the other side of this. The story is I haven't followed Yemen super closely since our Stratford days. I used to be very up to date with all the various factions and who was on what side and everything else. Yemen's in civil war. They've been on and off civil war since the '60s. Um, there's the Iranian-backed
Longer than
Houthis who are
that.
yeah, longer than that, but, fine. But, in this current anyway, yeah, you're right, longer than that. Also, like, beautiful country, like an old place of civilization, blah, 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 blah. But anyway, the current iteration of the civil war, you've got the Iranian-backed Houthis, and then you had the ones that were opposing the Houthis, and originally the Saudis and the UAE. I'm really simplifying here, but originally the Emiratis, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia, basically on the same side here. But then they ended up supporting different factions. And so what happened over the past couple of days is that the UAE faction is now fighting the Saudi-backed faction, and the Houthis are still sitting there firing off rockets into the Persian Gulf every once in a while. The Saudis are saying we need a peace conference, etc. Um, the Saudis and the UAE rivalry, I think, is one of the most undertalked things about in Middle Eastern politics. And when you go back and look at all the things that they've ruined in the region, they are a source of such incredible human tragedy in the region. Like, yes, Gaza is a human tragedy. Yes, I'm sure people want to talk about Israel and Gaza. It's awful. I'll be the first to drink 4 whiskeys with you and talk about how awful it is. But Saudi Arabia and these Gulfies, they're the ones who gave us Salafism and exported it everywhere. They had an indirect role in 9/11, an indirect role in the rise of ISIS, an indirect role in the end of Lebanon and dividing it up into all these different warring factions. They're the ones behind Yemen. They're the ones, the UAE and Saudi Arabia, on opposite sides of the Sudanese civil war, which is the most depressing, bloodiest conflict that's going on in the world right now. Tens of thousands of people dying. Nobody gives a shit because it's Sudan and not Israel. And so, like, it just doesn't make global headlines. Um, and I'm not worried, like, I'm not consulting with any Saudi pension funds or anything like that. I'm a little scared I could get Khashoggi one day or something like that. But I don't care, guys. Like, this Saudi UAE rivalry is very quietly, like, I mean, it's not like the Middle East had any sort of modicum of stability at all. But one of the reasons the Middle East is so fracked up right now is because even the Gulfi Arab states can't get on the same page. And they're using all these proxy conflicts and American weapons and American backing to run around with these proxy wars to try and run the region in their interest. And when Iran, occupied with its own things and Turkey occupied with its own things, like, there's just not a grand force that is operating there. But anyway, take it how you want, because I'm sure that you'll have a different point of view than me on that. Or maybe you'll agree. I'd be interested in that.
Well, I think that this has happened before between UAE and Saudi Arabia, in particularly in their relationship with Iran. Saudi Arabia, UAE, particularly Dubai, the Emirate of Dubai, had a very good relationship with Iran. Saudi Arabia was always irked by that. And then in 2022, when Saudi Arabia created detente with Iran, it took the UAE by surprise. Like, hey, but you gave us all this criticism for our diplomatic approach to Iran. Now you're making a deal with them. So that was one example. Saudi policy towards Lebanon and Qatar were like tacitly supported by UAE, but also like it was a violent shift on both. So I'm not sure this is that different, And what I would say is that, you saw the way the UAE reacted to the Saudi policy. I mean, they just said, okay, fine. They basically said, okay, fine, and they withdrew the troops. So Saudi Arabia is acting like any other, I think, regional hegemon would act. It's bullying its allies, it's bullying its enemies, and it's throwing its weight around. And countries are falling into place because, it is just the way power works. So, yeah, I mean, I guess I'll take the other side of this because I just don't think it's as, relevant, or it's as, like, really profound, maybe.
No, it's not. I mean, it's just another. You're right. There's nothing unprecedented. I'm not saying anything new is happening in Yemen. I just, like, we got, when people were going at us on social media saying, "Oh, well, you also have to talk about this thing in Yemen." I was sort of like, "Do we really have to talk about this thing in Yemen? And if we are going to talk about this thing in Yemen, let's talk about what this rivalry has done, not just in Yemen, but in all of these other countries. Whether it's, assassinations of Lebanese prime ministers or the rise of ISIS. Who was funding ISIS? Who taught these people? Who educated them? Where did they come from? Like, follow the money there. Sudan, follow the money there. See what's happening. Like, all of this, like, it's a very shady, horrible story. And we don't talk about it, and we don't blame them as much because they've got all of this money and nobody wants to say bad things about them. So I'll say the bad things about
I'm
them.
not
Like,
sure that's the case at
that,
all. There was a piece of legislation in the U.S. Congress on this. You know what I mean? Like, I think the
that
president.
went nowhere. That was Bernie. Like, that's the outer
I know, but like
fringes.
the
You
president
think
of
that
the,
these lobbyists were gonna let that get through? Come
I
on.
mean, President of the United States of America didn't want to like shake Mohammed bin Salman's hand, which I find hilarious because the United States of America has killed more journalists, Jacob, than Mohammed bin Salman. Sorry, bro. Facts.
No, no,
Facts.
I'm with you there. I,
So
I
like
I thought Biden's worst moment in that was you can't decide that you're not going to shake his hand, and then because gas prices get a little high,
fist bump him.
gasoline prices, I mean, that you're going to fist bump him. Like, if you're going to do that, double
I
down on the
just
bit, man. You need to like totally not like deal with him. But
I think
anyway.
look, I think the part of this that I disagree with you, and we can do a whole podcast on this, is I think that support for Islamic State, support for Al Qaeda, is a fundamental part of the rebirth of new Middle East. It was exactly that support that gave us the renaissance that the region is in right now. And yet the place is extremely stable. Like it's swimming in money. Okay? And not
Yeah,
just like they have money because of oil. People are taking their money. I know Brazilian family offices moving to Dubai because it's stable in a multipolar system. It's become the most stable financial center in the world because it's open to business to everyone. Why? What has greased the wheels of this stability? It's precisely the mistakes that the leadership of Gulf Arab monarchies, Saudi Arabia, has made that finally made them realize that the biggest victims of terrorism is not going to be Americans, it's going to be themselves. And that was why
yeah,
Islamic State attack on Mosul and the proclamation of the caliphate by Baghdadi were so important. They were like the 30-year war in Europe where Protestants and Catholics just one day woke up and were like, what the fuck are we doing? We just depopulated Germany. We're going to need to import all these like Poles and Russians and Slavs to repopulate Germany because we just killed a third of all male population because of Protestant Catholic sectarian violence. That's what happened in the Middle East. So I do separate the past, which I know is recent. I get it, and the future. And I think the future is much more brighter because these countries are now acting just like any other sovereign state. They are not supporting various transnational terrorist movements. Are they supporting terrorist like guerrilla groups in Africa? We just talked about the U.S. doing the same in Latin America. So like, yeah,
yeah. You have a lower bar for Renaissance than I do, and if I mean, I would be looking. I would be looking at Singapore rather than the UAE if I was really worried about some of these things. But that's
it's
that's a
not a bad
podcast for a
choice.
different time.
It's not a bad choice. The problem is Singapore. I think has Singapore is much more in an epicenter of geopolitical conflict of the future. I think Middle East is the center of geopolitical conflict of the past. Like I just don't think it's that relevant anymore, and I think that's what creates a level of security just in the lack of relevance. Ironically. Now,
That's that's a lovely disagreement. We should do a whole episode Singapore versus Dubai, and I'll take you on there.
all right, hot take. That was a hot take. I don't actually disagree with you. I mean, I think both are good options. Guess what's not a good option anymore for wealth management? Hong Kong. Like
Yeah,
that's or Caribbean. That's
yeah.
that ship sailed.
Uh, our,
No,
our our geopolitical godfather. I'll never forget. He described. Well, actually, he described Lebanon as this, so I'll steal it. But I think I've taken to describing Dubai and Singapore as the cantina in Star Wars:
yes,
A New Hope, where it's
yes,
just everybody's there,
everybody.
like the jazz music is playing in the background. Like that's what
But that's why I
it's
think
about.
Dubai is truly, if it comes to that, there's other things that I think Singapore is much better at, such as actual financial services. You know, but if it comes down to the cantina, it really is Dubai today. It really truly is Dubai. Dubai is the Star Wars cantina, and I think that it wouldn't be able to be the Star Wars cantina if they were just doing everything wrong in the UAE. Um, Final thing I want to say is
Yep. Take us away.
geopolitical movies. Great episode. I really enjoyed doing that with you. Um, I've had some time to digest things, and I think that we missed a couple of movies. I don't know if you have like a running list, but I just wanted to run through a couple that actually came up today. So, Godfather 2, and I thought of this before Venezuela and before your forecast, which I think is awesome on Cuba, that the whole plot really focuses on Cuba in Godfather 2. And you see through the eyes. We always think of Cuba as the 13 Days, which I didn't like as a movie. It was like, whatever, John Kennedy worshiping. That's fine. It's an okay movie. We did not talk about 13 Days in our list. But Godfather 2 is actually better because it shows the size of Cuba that you referenced today, which is this side of Cuba that it isn't about Soviet missiles. It's like, it's a fucking island in the Caribbean with 10 million awesome people 90 miles away from Florida, baby. Like, let's go. Are you kidding me? Like, that's incredible. And that's what that cake, the Cuban shaped cake in that movie represents. The second movie that did come up today, I just thought of it right now because you mentioned Congo, Siege of Jadotville. Watch it. Funny movie, like in that, I mean, it's not funny at all. It's actually, tragedy, and these Irish soldiers are heroically trying to stay alive. But it's just this weird moment in the Cold War where like French mercenaries are fighting Irish like troops, That's a really interesting moment of history, which brings me to one of the things that one of our listeners asked us to do, Jacob, which I think we 100% have to do, which is we have to think of a list of global events that haven't been turned into a movie that should. So like, why is the Siege of Jadotville, which nobody knows about, nobody listening to this has ever heard of it, why is that a movie? I mean, it's a crazy moment in history, and it's a very Irish, it's a very like important moment for Ireland as a country, for the Republic of Ireland, and I understand why they kind of invested in that movie, but I think it's interesting how many other events like that we can think of. Then Delta Force, definitely thought of that this morning when I woke up. I was like, holy shit, I forgot to put Delta Force. I would have definitely put it in my list of top 20 because when I was a kid, that definitely taught me a lot. Most things were wrong that they taught me, but but it was cool. One of our listeners, viewers, whatever you want to call, one of our fans said Killing Field, the movie about Cambodia. I blame you. You're the guy that should have thought of that. That seems like your movie.
I'll fall on my sword. Yeah, that's fine.
And then finally, the Papic family tradition around Christmas, New Year's. You don't know what to do with the kids. Especially my kids are older than your kids. What do you do with them? Like, there's all these empty hours and hours and hours. So what do? We rewatch Lord of the Rings.
Oh, well, yeah.
And I feel like we should have put that because I'll tell you this, as a very young kid reading Lord of the Rings, the maps, the kingdoms, the factions, the intrigue, the terrorism, the subversion, the infiltration, the exfiltration operations. I mean, that's what Frodo is. He's an infiltration by a small group of special forces. I mean, it is as geopolitical as a Tom Clancy novel, I think. And so
It certainly is, and I thought about it, and one of these days I'm going to write my April Fool's piece, like a net assessment of Rohan. That's like on my list of things to do. And Tolkien's backstory here is really important. Dealing with the pains of World War I, thinking about World War II and the Lord of the Rings, and also his experiences in World War I are right there. It's religion. I mean, C.S. Lewis and Tolkien used to argue about what was the best way to glorify God, and for the Narnia and Lord of the Rings are their different ways of trying to do that. I'm showing off my Oxford grad credentials here because I spend way too much time in The Eagle and the Child talking about these things. But yes, we should do a whole thing and I think we should come back next year and force ourselves to do another list of geopolitical movies and not pick any of the ones that we
Ooh,
picked
I like
before. Because I think as we go and as we watch
like that.
it should be our annual tradition for New Year's Eve. We'll do geopolitical movies. And yes, I love this thing about, moments in history that have not had movies made about them. We just have to make sure that we talk to our lawyers so that if anybody does take the idea, we are
Ooh.
executive producers, that we get compensated
Yeah.
accordingly. Because I don't want to give somebody this idea that, hey, what we really need is a movie on the attempted Scottish settlement of the Darien Gap. And I don't want some Hollywood producer to
Yes.
take that and be like, guys, this is it. And he got it from me, but he's not going to give any credit.
Dude,
So we just need to think
I know
through
exactly what
like
you're
how
talking
we're
about.
going to do this. you
I
know?
was in the Panama Canal Museum in Panama City, and I literally read that whole story, and I was like, "Holy shit!" It's like basically a combination of The Big Short and I don't know what. It's a crazy story.
Well, it's like a combination of The Big Short and Naked and Afraid or Survivor,
Yeah,
and also like Master and
yeah,
Commander,
yeah.
and Last of the Mohicans, like all blended into
And
one
Braveheart
beautiful
and
story.
Braveheart.
And like it's all of it. It's all of it put together. But we just need to make sure that we have the receipts there. Um, okay. Anything else? I mean, we're going to record in 2 more. We'll get on and do another emergency one if we have to. But President Trump says probably the first round went so well that the second round is not going to be necessary. So on
That's
to the
awesome.
governing of Venezuela for U.S. troops. And we'll be back with another episode in a couple of days. So cheers, y'all. Hope you enjoyed it.